So as we turn to the next section of our program, I do want to share with you just a little bit of information about what's going on in North Carolina. In many ways, building upon Mike's really good work, the Institute for Emerging Issues devised what we are calling the FutureWork Disruption Index. We took the good work that Mike had done on technological unemployment, and we layered on that disruptive changes in our demography to really see what was happening county by county across North Carolina. If you look in your program books on the page entitled The Case for the Forum, you'll see some really cool maps that show you what's going on across the state. Obviously, you can also find this in the app in the section also entitled The Case for the Forum. For those of you who want to be able to play with the interactivity of the map and go a little bit more deep, you can do that outside. We've got a huge computer table sitting by the IEI booth. Go check out your county and be sure that when you leave here, you're ready to go home and really explain what all of this means for your next door neighbors. Just a few highlights coming out of the Disruption Index, if I might. As Mike has said, in counties across the state, automation threatens large numbers of current jobs. Low-wage jobs particularly at risk, but I'm really glad that he took the time to say automation is reaching up the jobs ladder to threaten many job categories. We've got to pay attention to all of this. Note that the counties that are facing the highest percentage of job losses due to automation are Watauga, Carteret, Dare, Johnston, Buncombe, and Catawba. On average, as you look across North Carolina, our counties face the potential loss of more than 25% of current jobs and nearly 20% of current wages as a result. I really do hope you will take some time to play around with this disruption index. Let me be clear, it is not meant to offer answers. It is meant to provoke good questions. I hope more of the sorts of questions already provoked by our first two speakers. So if the FutureWork Disruption Index and our first two speakers have helped us to understand the scope of what we're facing, that it really is a challenge and a challenge of significant proportion, we think it's also important to take some time to talk about the opportunities. Our next two speakers will help us better understand some creative ways that institutions right now, today, are using new technology platforms and working together in completely unbelievable ways of thinking just yesterday. And they're creating smart strategies for job growth and job creation. Really excited to have our good friend Devin Fidler of the Institute for the Future, who will talk about what institutions can do to adapt to uncertain future. But first, before Devin, we'll hear from Robbie Allen, CEO of Automated Insights, who's going to give us a look at how emerging technologies can help create jobs. Folks, let's turn from crisis to opportunity and give these two gentlemen a big round of applause. Go make them happy.
Thank you. Hello, good morning. So I'm Robbie Allen, the CEO and founder of Automated Insights. We're actually based in downtown Durham, so a local company here. Today I'm excited to talk to you because, this is just a phenomenal opportunity in human history. And oftentimes those can be scary, but then also there's a lot of things that we can do to, reassure folks that things are going to happen over a period of time, and maybe we shouldn't necessarily get so scared about the future that, in fact, the future will be better. First, let me tell you a little bit about what my company does. We have a platform called Wordsmith. Wordsmith helps people automate the creation of content. Actually, Martin mentioned us earlier. This has been an interesting time because the types of things that we do have garnered a lot of press because there's a lot of concern about a software like what we have automating people out of jobs in the future. Wordsmith takes structured data and helps people automate content. You take data, you apply it to a narrative structure, and you can produce tens, hundreds, thousands, even millions of pieces of content. We work with lots of big name companies, and we've been at this over 5 years now. We're working with everyone from Comcast to Yahoo to the Associated Press. Lots of interesting implementations across the board. In fact, the rate at which the content we create is growing at such a sort of unpredictable fashion that I could have never thought 5 years ago that we would be the largest producer of high-quality content in the world. Now, that's maybe kind of a big statement that you weren't expecting from a CEO of a Durham startup, but it's actually the truth. Last year, we produced over 1.5 billion pieces of content for our customers. Now, similarly, the rate at which I do interviews talking about how much we're taking jobs has similarly increased. I'm not doing a billion of them yet. It feels like it at times, but it is growing. Year after year, more and more interviews about automated insights potentially taking jobs across a number of industries, everything from journalists to financial analysts, and all different types of reporting. I knew early on that this technology was going to have a lot of attention. I wrote a blog post in 2011 titled "The Future of Sports Journalism." Sports is kind of where we initially got started. The future of sports journalism is automated. I've written a bunch of blog posts, but that's the only one in my career where after 10 minutes, I was actually getting calls by a number of journalists wanting to talk about that statement. And so it's only continued to expand since then, as we did high-profile implementations for the likes of the Associated Press and others. Now, I'm happy to report that this graph is also true, and that's the number of jobs that, to our knowledge, have been lost as a result of an implementation of Wordsmith is still zero today. So yet we're generating over 1.5 billion pieces of content a year, and again, that number is just going to continue to grow potentially at an exponential rate. I have a large number every week, interviews that I have to do with people wanting to know about what's our impact on the jobs and the overall economy. And yet, to our knowledge, no one's actually lost a job due to our implementation. In fact, we're a little over a 50-person company. We're a net creator of jobs. And so that's pretty good to know, as well as we're aware of several people that have been promoted after a successful implementation of Wordsmith. So overall, it's a very positive theme that we've seen to date. Now, I'm not here to say that it's the case that no one's going to lose a job due to technology, or that even with Wordsmith and the technology that Automated Insights creates, that no one will ever lose a job. But I think it's worth kind of taking a step back. Some of these themes you've already heard today. The 20th century was all about automating repetitive physical tasks, right? The assembly line really came to fruition. Manufacturing was optimized at a high rate. So if your job prior to that was doing something manually, repetitively, that was prime for being automated. And in fact, it was to a great degree. The 21st century is going to be all about automating repetitive intellectual tasks. So again, that's in some ways you can view what Wordsmith does as automating repetitive intellectual tasks. And so if you're wanting to create an earnings report like the Associated Press did, they could cover 300 companies a quarter. Earnings reports are fairly repetitive in nature. There was some basic analysis that had to go into it, a little bit of analysis into what's going on with the company or the industry, but it was absolutely a repetitive intellectual task. We went in, partnered with the Associated Press, and now they're able to cover over 3,000 companies a quarter using our technology. Again, that was something that we were a little worried about early on. We heard a lot of people saying, well, once this goes live, you're going to be disrupting jobs. People are going to be losing jobs. In fact, I talked to around 20 different financial reporters, and they were all thrilled to know that we were automating earnings reports because, if you read many in your day, they're not the type of thing that people just love talking about what percentage a company's revenue went up or down. And that type of thing. And so these were not the things that journalists love getting out of bed every day to write about. And so we were able to automate that. And in some cases, maybe we automated 80% of the story and enabled the journalists to focus on the top 20% of the company analysis, the executive team, et cetera. And that was something that they were thrilled about because now they could go on and focus on things that require more creativity. Something that's not talked about enough, and I really think the future, and the future being, call it the next 50 years, is going to be much more of a humans plus software is making the world a better place. Not this notion that software, and if I had any critique of what I've heard so far, is that it's almost this black and white reality that we're going to face, where software is going to come in and take away lots of jobs, and then those people are not going to be able to find new forms of employment. I think it's much more likely, and what we're seeing, and again, kind of our story, the 0 jobs lost to date, is that humans plus software is going to make a better world than just having software, just having humans. And so there's already lots of cases where this is happening to date. For example, my story where I talked about, we can work with somebody like the Associated Press. There's probably no greater stalwart in the media than the Associated Press. They've been around for over 100 years, working with us to help automate certain aspects of their business, not resulting in job loss, but resulting in greater coverage of local companies that typically don't get covered. Another sort of fun example is we work with Yahoo automating fantasy football recaps. We do millions of fantasy football recaps every single week that summarize why my team won and your team lost, or vice versa. We asked a handful of sports journalists, would they be interested in writing 1 million fantasy football recaps every week, and no one was interested, surprisingly enough. So again, that's another example where we're creating a new service that wasn't possible before. It does require a human aspect. Again, there's people at Automated Insights that have to configure these systems. It's not a purely automated solution. And that's something to keep in mind, that in many cases, especially when you hear about artificial intelligence and machine learning, it's not that you just turn the machine on and it does all this stuff automatically. There's quite a bit of human configuration that has to go into it. So if you think about, if I wanted to leave with a couple of words of encouragement, if highly repetitive intellectual tasks will be automated, well, what should be the areas that we focus on? I have a 1-year-old and an 8-year-old son and daughter, and so I think about these same things. Well, at least with the state of the art of artificial intelligence today, systems are not able to reproduce the kind of creativity that humans are able to do today. Any amount of qualitative analysis is, again, something that computers are not well suited for. Computers are well suited for quantitative analysis. And so focusing on the things that really emphasize creativity and qualitative attributes is really going to be something that, I don't foresee technology, broaching or taking away jobs that require those in the near future. Again, if you look at the Associated Press example, we essentially automated the highly repetitive aspects of determining how much a company went up or down over the previous quarter. What are the things to talk about related to their numbers? But then they still have someone go in and provide color about what's going on with Google or Alphabet. What's the latest trends with Yahoo? How much longer are they going to make it? Those type of things that, again, emphasize things that are very difficult for computers to do on their own. The last point I'd make is that one job I can guarantee you is future-proof is that of an entrepreneur. And so, again, if there's anything that I push my kids for, and I think we need to do a better job in general, starting at a much earlier age, is really sort of emphasizing that the road of creating your own company is the pinnacle of creativity. And that'll be the type of thing, if you want to ensure that there's not an impact of jobs, focusing on company creation is a great way to do that. I love this Alan Kay quote, the best way to predict the future is to invent it. Whether I'm right about the rate at which technology is going to overtake jobs, or Martin or anyone else, I can guarantee you this, that if you're an entrepreneur, you have much more control over your destiny than just about any other occupation. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the Research Director of the Institute for the Future, Devin Fidler.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. Great conversation so far. All right. See, this is the thing with automated systems. So my objective here is actually pretty simple. We've talked a lot about automation and jobs. I'm going to dive a bit more into automation and organizations and actually kind of go back at jobs from that direction, maybe come up with a few more perspectives that may lend to this. So if there's a starting principle for a conversation like this, it could be something as simple as the observation that that really technologies have been for a long time creating new ways of getting things done, right? And this actually lends a lot of conversation, or a lot of context to the jobs conversation as well, because if you look historically at where these jobs we're worried about came from, go back before industrialization. You have something like, say, an artisanal craft like blacksmithing. Here, one person was responsible for everything from, parts of, wheel hubs to horseshoes, all a single individual working as an artisan. As that got industrialized, as that got scaled up by people like Vanderbilt and Carnegie, the picture changed, right? You got something that looked a lot more like this, and you got the emergence of those jobs that we keep talking about, right? One way to think about this is in terms of what we've gained from this. So if you would go back before industrialization and look at the production of something as simple as a shirt, right? A shirt would actually take 7 hours of sewing manually, but weaving the cloth would also have to be done manually and would take about 72 hours. And even spinning the thread would have to be a manual process, right? That's 400 hours of work if you don't have any of the benefits of automation. This means that a shirt would, be over 400 hours of labor, and if you, charge that out at federal minimum wage, you'd be paying more than $3,000 for the shirt you're wearing, right? So automation has played into this jobs conversation in a really interesting way. This, though, has been the technology, and I'll posit for this conversation that we can think about this as a technology for organizing that process, right? This emerged, it isn't even that old. We think of organizational structures that we're familiar with as handed down from on high in some ways, but it's not actually that old. This is only 150, 200 years old. It emerged as a way to organize those industrial processes, right? You have these hierarchical structures. Each of those boxes are those jobs that we're talking about, right? But that wasn't intentional, right? If you go back and look at the intention behind it, the idea of jobs here, and really the idea of an emergence of middle class, of sort of middle management, is kind of a happy accident, right? We've had a lot of benefits from that, but it wasn't intentionally built into the system. If, though, we're going to say that this is a kind of technology, then it's worth looking at the ways that this technology is being disrupted. And I would argue, actually, that they're more impactful and shorter term than any of the conversations about machine learning or robotics overtaking jobs as we traditionally think of them. This is sort of our summation of a lot of what's happening on the periphery of this right now. So if you look at organizations that are starting to experiment with new models, kind of nibbling away at the edges of that old org chart structure, one thing they have in common is that they're largely algorithms themselves, right? The organizations, those org chart structures, are being slowly replaced with algorithmic systems. And this is something everyone in this room has encountered and is familiar with, actually. So if you're reading, the paper and you run across companies like Uber or Groupon or Airbnb, or Indiegogo, or Kickstarter, or any of these platforms, all of them have created a middle management tier that's essentially run out of software, right? They're all coordinating resources, managing resources using software. And it's not just physical resources that we're talking about. It's human resources as well. So when you hear about the gig economy or the, kind of work in the sharing economy, it's the exact same principle, right? Companies like Upwork, Freelancer, TaskRabbit, which does the same thing in place, are all allowing people to go onto a digital system, find workers, anybody in the amount of time that I'm up on stage here today could actually do this, go online, find workers, employ them, get them working on something, and kind of continue the relationship from there. Now, the thing is, all of those companies, all of those sharing economy, gig economy companies, all have the same recipe at the core of them, right? They're all built on the same principle. If you're a venture capitalist right now, you're actually getting sick of people coming to you with the same recipe over and over, because they all are basically designed to activate, deactivate, and reconfigure resources to more fluidly get them to where they're needed when they're needed, right? You can think of Uber getting those vehicles where they're needed. You can think of Airbnb getting tenants and people with extra space to where they're needed. You can think of companies like Upwork actually getting, freelance work to where it's needed when it's needed, right? This routing capability that's the core of the internet itself, really being applied to organizational structures. The thing that I really find fascinating about this is a pretty good description of what that org chart was designed for as well, right? That org chart was also designed as a way to coordinate resources, to get them to where they're needed, when they're needed. So if there's an example of a company that's sort of a great image of what this could look like, I would say it's, okay, pop forward, there we go. This one. So this is a company called PulsePoint. This is San Ramon, California based. It was actually created by the fire chief in the city. So the story is he was sitting, having coffee, off duty, but still in uniform, a few years ago, and he heard one of his fire trucks approaching, coming closer and closer. He started to wonder, where are my guys going? The fire truck pulled up right in front of the coffee shop where he's sitting there. People jump off, dash into the convenience store next door, because just 15 feet away, but on the other side of a wall, there was somebody having a heart attack. And he realized he was the perfect person to respond to this, right? He teaches CPR, he's the chief of the fire department, he's in uniform, but he had no way of knowing, right? There was no coordination mechanism to let him know that he was needed 15 feet away. And that's why he created the PulsePoint app. I'll actually go ahead and play a video, if it works, of how it works. This is something that they created and does a great job of explaining it, I think. So if you have a cardiac event, you have about 3 to 5 minutes from this moment before serious damage can start to set in. So no matter how well funded a municipality is, it's hard to get somebody there that quickly, right? You can have a fire department and a paramedic on every corner. It's still tricky. So the question becomes, how do you find somebody who has that skill and converge them as quickly as possible? In a city that's outfitted with PulsePoint, the call goes out to 911 just like it would anywhere else. Fire department's dispatched, paramedics are dispatched, music swells. At the same time, though, anyone within about 6 blocks who's CPR certified, you have to be CPR certified to use it, who has the application and who chooses to, is given a message, right? There's somewhere in 6 blocks somebody having a cardiac issue that you may be able to help with. You can converge on this problem. I haven't talked to him for a while. I haven't talked to him in about 9 months. But as of then, they never had more than 2 people in that radius and not had at least one private person respond, right? So the response rate actually is quite high for this. They're going to call it the Pulse, or the fire department app here. The reason it's called PulsePoint now is the applications have actually been increasing dramatically. So it was originally just CPR. Now as PulsePoint, it's used for search and rescue. It's used for disaster response. Their latest project is actually mapping where all of the electric defibrillators, the AED machines, are in big public buildings like this one, right? The thing I love about this video is not only does it illustrate this point beautifully about what software-defined organization looks like, it's also the most heartwarming introduction to a category of enterprise software you're ever going to see, right? Because I guarantee you that if you have an organization that has processes in place, somebody approaches you within the next couple of years and says, what's your process if something goes wrong, say on one of your machines? Places I've worked in the past, the process is typically a phone tree, right? You start calling, you try to find the people who know what they're doing, converge them on the issue. You rely on that organizational chart structure, right? The opportunity that this affords is the one to potentially go simply pull up the software, have it identify who is best positioned to respond, ping them, find out who's actually actually available, and converge them on the problem in real time, right? This is a principle that kind of competes with traditional organizations in some ways, right? Which brings us to the question of where is this headed? And this is where some of the experimental work we've been doing at the Institute comes in, some of the work that the gig economy or sharing economy platforms have been doing. How far can you extend this? One principle that we've found really helpful is the idea that jobs themselves, we've talked a lot about the impacts that technology has on jobs, and jobs themselves really do seem to be threatened by technology, right? But it's not so much always that they're being completely replaced as that they're being disaggregated, right? That they're being transformed into something that looks a little bit more like what we call human task routing, right? This idea that tasks can actually be routed to individuals in the right places at the right time, right? Again, activate, deactivate, and reconfigure resources to get them where they're needed, when they're needed. Which brings us to the sort of frontier of this space. So we've been doing some work that was written up recently in HBR around actually building software on top of these platforms, actually building software that can call on people on TaskRabbit, people on Upwork, people on Uber, on an as-needed basis. So the way it works, we essentially will build out a workflow, build out a recipe, and it takes a while, right? This takes longer than it would take to just do the process in many cases. But we do a lot of research at the Institute. So let's say we need a literature review. It turns out a lit review is a pretty, a pretty standardized process. We can go and break that task down into individual components that the software can then go onto the work platforms, onto platforms like Freelancer and Upwork, identify using machine learning, again, using machine learning as a way to increase employment in some ways, identify people who are really well suited, really well matched for that work. They'll get a message that basically says, I'm a digital system, but I think, you seem like you might be a really good fit for this. They'll be asked to do a test task, so they'll do a sort of 30-minute to an hour, kind of sample piece of work. If that works out, they'll be pulled into the system. So anytime the system needs somebody to, let's say, do a deep editorial review of something, it will know to go to Sarah, who's a great editorial, who has a great editorial eye. We've been actually surprised by the quality of people on some of these platforms. So the editor that the system prioritizes above all the others is actually an editor on a major business magazine. So she's on, she's in the masthead of the business magazine. She's also doing freelance work on the side. When it has software, it sometimes finds software computer science professors. It's got a computer science professor in Moscow who likes to work on sort of cutting edge projects, and it will go out and identify. What this suggests to us is that it may be that work is, kind of not on as steep a decline as it may seem, but jobs may well be, right? And that invites new questions. If you were to look at where this was headed, so we've spun out an organization called Rethinkery Labs that does nothing but this. It's basically software trying to take the frontiers of what's possible and prototype it, basically build working prototypes. Again, everything I've described is stuff that actually exists today. Where does this head? Well, one principle that's helpful here is the principle of self-driving organizations, right? As you have this increased ability to automate management processes, you're increasingly seeing even, big commercial players like Uber going out and identifying market opportunities in an automated way, finding the right people to, to staff that in an automated way, bringing them together to coordinate value in an automated way, and then realizing that value in an automated way, right? It's software structures that are doing a lot of the role of organizations as we're familiar with them. If you look at some of these platform labor, plays, one of the striking things is that Uber has over 160,000 drivers in the United States, most of whom are not in regular contact with a human manager, right? If you get in one of those vehicles, it becomes clear pretty quickly that the manager is is the software, right? The manager, the middle management layer is this software application running on the phone. You know, this is really interesting from our standpoint. It kind of implies that, you know, that automation can pull in more work potentially than job structures have in the past. And we've actually gotten an example of something like this historically. So if you look at the financial markets, starting in the mid-90s, you saw the very first introduction of the kind of software we've been discussing today, right? This increasing automation in financial markets. What that's corresponded with, you know, perfectly is a dramatic increase in trading volume, right? As automated systems have taken over more of the advisory role and then increasingly more of the actual trading role, you've seen an increase in just churn on the markets, right? Now, in the case of markets, this is, you know, this is trading, you know, just indicators of ownership. But if this is the physical economy, then the corollary is GDP, right? If you have software driving these institutional processes, driving more rides, driving the creation of more buildings, driving the, you know, the hiring of more people in a, you know, in a workflow way rather than a jobs way, then you would expect to see an increase in GDP. Now, the question from our standpoint is, what kind of jobs will these be, right? What kind of work is this if we're moving away from jobs as we traditionally think of them? And that brings us to the Workable Futures Initiative, which is what I work on at the Institute. Essentially, we've brought together a coalition of people, representatives from industry, leaders of the public sector space, leaders in the NGO space, to systematically think through how can we make this work, this new kind of work, livable, right? It took us a while to get the equation right with jobs and with industrialization. Can we avoid going back to the very beginning, back to the drawing board, and actually take some of the lessons that we learned in that process and apply it directly? Can we make these workable, right? So if I was going to sort of leave with a thought, it would be this. You know, digital technologies are critical, but it's worth remembering that we are working with institutional technologies as well, organizational technologies. And if we wanted to, for example, create the possibility of identifying opportunities to do things, combining those opportunities into, into realizable projects, finding people who are good matches to those projects, hiring them, managing them, releasing them, that's a question that isn't decades down the road. That isn't a long-term machine learning question. That isn't a long-term robotics question. That's something we can do now that could, increase work, potentially make the future more workable, a project that I hope everyone in this room will join us on. Thank you so much.
So I don't know about you, and whether you're a tech optimist or pessimist, or whether you're focused on jobs or skills, but my head is already starting to spin, and it's not quite 10 o'clock in the morning. How about you? Yes? So I'm going to offer a couple of promises, and you can hold me to this by the end of the day. If you're not yet feeling as though you might be drinking from a fire hose, just sit still long enough, you will be. Fortunately, you won't stay there. We've really tried to bring to you today speakers who come from very different perspectives. Their purpose is really to provoke your thought. But as I said earlier today, this is really about you and what you think. And so my second promise is you will have a chance to reflect individually on what all of this means, to try to refine your own perspective, certainly to begin to think really hard about responsive strategies. You'll also have a chance to do that collectively. And later on this morning, we'll have the first of 2 audience engagement processes where you'll be able to talk with people at your table and begin to develop some consensus about what is a really big, important step that we could take in North Carolina, not just to be one of the first states to have this conversation, but one of the first states to really do something about this conversation. And finally, as I alluded to this morning, we're going to spend our time thinking about these big steps based on some great work of our very brilliant working group. I love the group that Devin put together out in Palo Alto, but let me just tell you, they ain't got nothing on the group we put together in North Carolina. So our working group had their 10 strategies. Our forum ambassadors winnowed them down to 5. Your challenge is going to be to prioritize across those 5. I hope you'll take some time to look at the strategies throughout the morning so that you're really prepared to ask yourself individually what you think, to share that with the people at your table, and then finally, before the end of the day, to give us your collective sense of where the energy in this room might be. Now, I did say earlier that there are a couple of people and groups who have yet to get their shout out. And so I'd like to now ask the members of the National Advisory Board of the Institute for Emerging Issues to please stand and be recognized. There is nothing we do at IEI that could be done without these amazing leaders. I can't tell you what a gift it is to be able to pick up the phone and call either any one of them at any time of day and know that they will move heaven and earth to be sure that the work of IEI continues to prosper in this state. I just want to say, I am the luckiest girl with the best board ever. And I know that some of you may feel a little bit of jealousy. That's okay. The reason I'm bragging is so that you feel a little green. It's all good. I love you anyway. Now, some of you may be looking around the room and be asking yourself, wait a minute. There's this founding member of the board of the Institute for Emerging Issues, in fact, the founder of the organization, and nobody's asked me to do anything yet today, so he must not be in the room. I have a message I'd like to share with you.
I want to welcome each of you to the 31st Emerging Issues Forum. I am so sorry that I can't be with you this year, as I have been for 3 decades. And I know that there are many of you in this audience who have been to all 30 of our previous forums when we've been doing great work. Now this year you have a special topic, future work. What will that work be? What will the jobs be? How do you prepare for them and get them and hold them? Our young people in particular today want to know the answers to that. So I want to thank all of you for coming. The people who come to this forum are among the brightest people in our state and in our country. You're always coming up with new ideas, and you'll do it this time as you address this very important topic. So, thank you for coming. Thank you for all you do for North Carolina. And I want you to know I will be back with you soon as we work together to build this state and make it all that it can be, all that it should be, all that it must be.
Not a single person in this room who knows Governor Hunt would be surprised that when I saw him last week, he grabbed me by the elbow and he said, Anita, you better make sure those people answer the question about how my neighbors in Wilson County are going to be able to find jobs in this future of work. So, with that charge on the mind, it is now time to take our first break of the morning. I'll see you back here in 10 minutes. Thank you.